welcome to another expert talk coming right into your home. And I know we're trying to be of service to you, and we would love to have your help because we're making progress with ALS research at Everything ALS. We're aiming to discover new insights, improve early detection, and find a cure for ALS. You can help us if you would enjoy doing that. It would be wonderful. The speech study will improve the diagnosis and prognosis of ALS. Participants will record 5 speech samples over 5 months, each lasting approximately 15 minutes. We welcome both healthy and individuals, and those diagnosed with ALS are likely to have ALS. To sign up, please visit everythingals.org/speech project. We'll also have that in the chat so you can have that connection also. One other help that you could be to us, we have a study called Asymptomatic Gene Carrier Study. If you're a gene carrier and asymptomatic and interested in remotely monitoring your speech, cognition, and motor skills, please visit everythingals.org/asymptomatic study, and you'll find that in our chat also. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Indu. Welcome.
Yes, I would love to welcome Dr. Andrews here. And today's topic is going to be accelerating ALS care and research through collaborative networks and insight from NEALS and Beyond. I have pleasure of knowing Dr. Andrews here for a while, and it's such an honor to have her here and host. And Dr. Andrews is a director of Neuromuscular Clinical Trials and associate professor of neurology at Columbia University Medical Center. In addition to overseeing neuromuscular clinical trials, she cares for people with neuromuscular disorders with specific focus in ALS. I've specifically introduced some of the people that I know to Dr. Andrews, and I have to say, they thank me profusely for having made that introduction. So her care is well looked after, and we're very lucky to have her in our field. And she's also currently elected co-chair of NEALS, which is Northeastern ALS Consortium, an ALS clinical trial consortium of over 150 international specialty centers, and also an appointed fellow of AAN and fellow of American Neurology Association. She has been recognized in her field and been awarded many prizes for innovation in ALS. And Dr. Andrews has earned her interdepartmental bachelor's degree in music and biology and MSc in biostatistics from public health at Columbia University. She's completed a neurology residency training at University of Connecticut with fellowship in ALS at Columbia University, and she is board certified in neurology, neuromuscular disease, and electrodiagnostic medicine. With no further ado, I would love to invite Dr. Andrews to come in and give her, presentation to us.
Thank you. Is that my cue? I had clinic today, so I just barely got myself together, and a lot of makeup and filters. But I'm not gonna lie. But I have to say, I'm really thankful that you guys invited me to talk. And I usually give a clinical trials pipeline talk, and Dr. Sokovich over at Mass General has already given some recent talks, as well as many of my colleagues in this expert talk series. And I was really moved and actually inspired by the fact, and it just speaks to the vision, the forward vision of Everything ALS that I truly believe in, which is that it's not just about what's here and what's now, but looking forward and thinking about how we can move mountains really to find that cure that McFinn was talking about earlier. And it really does take collaboration, and how we do that. Sometimes, we have tried it for many, many years, and we kind of revamp it each year. But I really think our field is in a different place today than it ever was. I've been doing this now for 21 years. And so it's been, and I got grays now, and I embrace them. But I think it's been really an important time to collaborate. I think it is also a way that collaboration can extend beyond just those of us that know ALS, who are living with ALS, and really leveraging that. And Indu, I'm so happy you're here, but it is very much to Indu's credit to really think outside the box and be an innovator. And she brings this energy and spirit that is infectious. And just when I think I can't go on anymore, and it's true. And just recently, my family's been touched by ALS. 2 members of my family now have ALS. It is just inspiring, and it makes me want to keep going and not ever give up until I can fix everything. So, and I certainly can't do that without everybody's help. So, Indu, I really appreciate this, and everyone who's involved with Everything ALS. Really, I don't want you to stop. Just keep going. So, with that, I will just present, and it's going to be a little bit more high-level collaboration talk. And I wanted to kind of highlight it's not always easy to see what these collaborations are doing, and I'm going to try to explain it to you in kind of a story form. So I'll try to share my screen, and hopefully you can see my screen. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Very good. And I'll try to put it in presentation mode. So you got my healthy introduction. Thank you for that generous introduction. I am not the only leader for NEALS. I actually co-chair with Dr. James Berry, who is very much involved with Everything ALS and also an innovator himself, which I just love working with him. But it does take really a collaborative spirit to kind of get through all of the things that we need for ALS. So I'm just going to introduce the concept of NEALS. So how I'm going to do this is through my leadership with Dr. Berry at NEALS, I'm going to talk about how this kind of spreads. It starts as an organization, it spreads to be a larger consortium, and then from there, it starts to pull in different people and different groups into the research, because the original mission, this is a revamped mission and vision. And originally, it was just a group of investigators founded by Dr. Scheffner and Dr. Sokovich, in the Northeast. It was 9 centers. We're hitting our 30th anniversary this year. And so they started out as 9 centers in the Northeast, and that's how the original name was. So the name, I'm not going to blow a surprise, but we are going in a revamp of the name. So that'll be announced at our annual meeting in October, because Northeast doesn't really reflect all of the centers that are involved. But it started out as centers trying to organize themselves as a clinical trial group, trying to make sure that we're ready for new investigational products, and really wanted to translate those the whole time. The mission has never changed. We wanted to develop new treatments that and innovate in research that we can kind of make a difference in curing or treating ALS. But that's expanded over time. And so we really knew, as the field has evolved, we've learned to kind of grow and involve a lot of stakeholders in the field. And so some of that is what I'm going to go through in the talk. And so now we went from 9 centers in the Northeast, and we're an active network of over 160 trial-ready centers. And the blobs, we're not as technologically savvy as Everything ALS, but we put our little dots on the map, and we have centers in the US, mainly in the US and Canada, but we have expanded into other regions. And it's not necessarily to go and take over those other regions. They come and ask for resources for NEALS, and they also coexist with their local ALS Clinical Trial Consortium. So the sites in Europe actually work with NCALS and TriCALS. The sites in Asia work with PACDALS. And so it's been something that's been an impetus to kind of grow and collaborate more broadly, more globally. But essentially, it's partnerships. NEALS is essentially a large clinical trial network, but it's really a partnership between clinicians, researchers, people with lived experiences, and more so now with industry, government, and many organizations that are involved in ALS. And ultimately, we want to run good clinical trials, and we want to be able to get those clinical trials to be successful and hopefully get new therapies there. But we do more than that. So aside from just being clinical trial ready and being people who live with ALS, or government stakeholders, or pharmaceutical companies, or clinical researchers and scientists, we do a lot of other things. Then it's kind of spawned really out of the changing landscape, which is driven by people and the community that is involved with ALS. So we have grown to include community engagement and webinars. Now doing them conjointly with other organizations is really important, so that we're not duplicating efforts. We do something called the Clinical Research Learning Institute. So people living with ALS wanted to understand how to help with developing clinical trials, or talking to industry or pharmaceutical sponsors and partners. So we have this whole formal curriculum that initially started with Dr. Rick Bedlack That started internally, and we used to do it once a year. Then it grew to virtual meetings sporadically throughout the year. And we're really proud that that curriculum is now shared globally. And we've had international clinical research learning institutes, which are we lovingly call CURLY. It's one of our real prized possessions here. We do science advisory meetings to help with industry partners develop trials that are patient-centric. We do involve community members, so people living with ALS can be appointed to be an advisor to the executive committee. We have the patient advisory committee. And once somebody graduates the Clinical Research Learning Institute, really to be an ambassador for research and science and communication and mentors for new people, they become a research ambassador. And so let me just we do also have a biorepository that now can be synergized with some existing and developing biorepositories. I'll talk about that. And we have NEALS subcommittees, which I'll talk about, which impact clinical care. So the more we were developing clinical trials, we realized that we had to really formalize our care and really try to partner with organizations that do advocacy for clinical care and clinics that involve providing clinical care. So some of the subcommittees on that clinical care piece involve different aspects that are affected when you're affected with ALS. And so that includes like the ventilation committee, the Veterans Affairs Committee. This wheel used to have just a few committees, and we've had to make it into this big wheel because we have so many committees, because there's so many different needs that we can actually do something about, create better protocols and develop better care, because in synergy, all of these components can improve clinical research and clinical trials as well as clinical care. And we do try to involve as a diverse group of individuals in each of these committees. So that means people living with ALS, people who may have expertise in that particular area. For example, pulmonologists will join the ventilatory committee, as well as neurologists and people living with the disease, to kind of refine what we're doing now and improve our standard of care. We do have ad hoc committees as well, and we try to make sure that we stay on top of what people need. The biorepository has been a really crucial part. We share this heavily with pharmaceutical companies and investigators that are really trying to launch a clinical trial. So when they have an experimental drug, they'll get samples and they'll test the target, or they'll test their drug in those samples to see if that is something they want to carry into clinical trials, or maybe they want to move into a larger clinical trial. So this repository exists. It's been around for many, many years. Dr. James Berry and Dr. Terry Hyman Patterson, Dr. Bowser has historically been leading this. But it is a difficult thing to sustain, and we've been able to synergize it with some existing repositories. So it's not just a standalone repository. And because NEALS has it is a shareable repository as well. Now, what is NEALS? So NEALS is a group of researchers and individuals. So the employees of NEALS, the people who are the employees, are the folks that you see on the screen. So this is our executive operations team, and I don't think they get enough credit for how much they do. So I just wanted to put them up there. Carly Allen is our program director, and Bev Smits is the associate program director. Jenny Hindley is the administrative coordinator, and we have Christina Smith, the communications coordinator, and they really do run all aspects of NEALS. But there is a board or an executive committee, and we're all volunteers. So we have our day jobs that we have to commit to, and we also do our part for the NEALS. So me and Dr. Berry chair the executive committee. You have to be elected by your peers or NEALS members, nominated and elected, and we have defined terms. So we have executive committee members that span all different institutions, and we also have our executive committee advisors that are people living with ALS or caregivers that can be appointed. So Lane Olaf was Allison Boulat actually was our first advisor, and she has been just spectacular in trying to help organize us and try to get us focused and efficient in doing our initiatives. Lane Olaf, who we lost recently, was just a gem of a person who really tried to give us the pulse of what's going on and having NEALS be more proactive rather than reactive to the changes in the field. And our newest advisors are Dave Schulman and Michael Robinson, who we're grateful for their time and effort and energy to bring their expertise, not only with their experience with ALS, but their professional expertise to bring it to NEALS as well, to help us function better and be as productive as possible. Now, The executive, in addition to the executive committee, we have the science advisory board. The science advisory board are appointed individuals that have preclinical science, early clinical trial specialty. They actually are available to speak to investigators who are developing protocols. They have expertise in different models, different experiments, different compounds, genetics, and some have clinical trial experience, regulatory authority experience. And so we partner with industry, and we will talk with pharmaceutical partners who are developing clinical trials to tighten it up and make sure they get connected to patient advisory committees or patient advisory boards to help them make their clinical trials as patient-centric as possible. The collaboration that occurs with the scientific advisory board is essentially bringing ALS experts to the people that are developing a clinical development program. We try to support them through, and this effort has been really great, because it used to be that companies come with an already established clinical trial and they're just like passing it by us just to give a check. But as years have gone by, we've been involved earlier and earlier and earlier, so that we can kind of drive kind of important experiments that need to be done to improve potential success. So some of the things that we've learned from the studies that did not succeed, and I always kind of remind people, we always learn something. It's not always a complete failure. We learn that sometimes if there's a drug that's being repurposed, we really don't study it well enough in the preclinical space before we bring it to people. We just take the same dose and just throw it into ALS. Or we don't take the time to really understand how the drug works. Is it engaging a target? How do we know? Is there a target engagement biomarker? We haven't historically had great biomarkers to look for potential efficacy, and we have neurofilament, and there's many others that are being developed. We have digital technology that we're refining to look for efficacy response maybe earlier in clinical trials, so that we know that we can potentially be more successful in a later pivotal trial. We are trying to make sure that we continue to drive innovation into those clinical trials. So with the SAB meeting with people developing drugs, we try to look at what we've been studying in exploratory studies, so new biomarkers, new digital technology, and trying to incorporate them into these programs, so that we can also learn, as they learn about their drug, our field can learn about these outcomes and biomarkers. And so essentially, for a company to do the process, or an investigator who has a project, they come to us, we try to set up a meeting, we do it by teleconference, and then we provide confidential feedback, and they work on it. And sometimes people come back and they continue to develop, and we've had more and more people coming earlier in the preclinical studies trying to figure out which experiments they want to do, which models. And I think that helps to create this collaborative kind of back and forth before they enter clinical trials. And when they enter clinical trials, we will have some confidence. The executive committee that you just saw earlier actually meets to try to discuss any potential partnerships where NEALS can provide support for a clinical trial entering any phase of the study. Typically, they come in phase 2, phase 3, but recently we've been meeting with people who are entering into phase 1. And so that kind of helps us try to make sure that we're doing things that the community needs. We're looking at compounds and outcomes that the community has asked for, and we've involved them in the process. And so that includes clinical trial designs, having patient or community advisory boards, having investigator meetings, webinars, and trying to communicate milestones. Now, the process for NEALS affiliated trial is an investigator or a company might have a trial that they're going to launch. They come and meet with the executive committee, and they have to meet criteria for safety, potential scientific rationale, efficacy, and study design quality. And then we can vet them as a NEALS affiliated trial, and we'll be able to provide services and support as they go through the development program. So this is just an example of a few ongoing NEALS affiliated trials. So these are ongoing. We have ALS Pharma, which AP101, if you're not familiar with it, it's a monoclonal antibody that's given, right now it's being given to folks with SOD1 mutation and also sporadic ALS. And so it's an ongoing study. Amylyx has AMX0114, which is an antisense oligonucleotide targeting calpain, and that's also for sporadic ALS. Biogen has tofersen, which actually has already received accelerated approval in the US in 2023 and conditional approval in Europe in 2024. And now we're testing it in pre-symptomatic individuals that carry a pathogenic mutation for SOD1. So they know they have the mutation that is linked as a cause for ALS, but they don't have ALS yet. So when they hit a threshold for neurofilament, so we're monitoring them monthly, and they hit the threshold, we'll treat them with tofersen. Of course, the platform trial, which many of you are probably already familiar with, we're anticipating regimen H and regimen I soon. The Healy Center just did a webinar through NEALS actually, and it'll be posted for My Match, which is a biomarker-driven study. So like the platform trial, it'll be a program that's set up to look at biomarkers that may tell us what might be the most common mechanism that's going on in somebody's body. So is it inflammatory? Is it oxidative stress? And maybe they can kind of line up with a potential investigational experimental therapy that targets that particular mechanism. So it's kind of more precision based. And of course, we learn from it too, because we don't really know fully all of the biomarkers that we can check in if they're validated. Leal Therapeutics has their antisense oligonucleotide also for sporadic ALS, and they're looking at lipid metabolism. And of course, the All ALS project, which has been presented here at this forum, is an observational study and continues to grow. We have a few new ones that have come onto the list. Trace Neuroscience has an antisense oligonucleotide, which is a gene therapy to modulate UNC13A. Again, to target, this would be a phase 1 level study, and it is to target sporadic ALS. And then Unicure also has an open study for those folks that have SOD1 and ALS. And it is a therapy that's using an adenoviral vector to kind of, the virus vector is supposed to travel into the body and provide the genetic material. And so that's also an early phase study. The other studies that are also affiliated right now are some of the NIH-funded expanded access programs. And so the CLEAN, Prelenia, and RAPA programs are affiliated with NEALS. And then their newest one, which is iButylase, which was funded this past year, is also up and running. And these are some of the list of the completed studies for the NEALS affiliated trials. So we try to partner with as many companies as possible to try to make sure that we are collaborating in the development, the execution, and also the reporting and transparency of the study. Now, one of the newest committees that we launched is the NEALS Information and Community Education Leadership. And I give Christina Fournier credit for the name, because actually the acronym comes out to be NICE, the NICE committee. But this actually was formed because there was a need for some communication about new studies, press releases, or new targets. And so we wanted to make sure that there was a way, and it's new, it's very, very new, and we are still trying to find ways to make this as efficient as possible. So whether it's white papers, journal articles, but webinars are one of them, webinar topics, suggestions. Most recently, this committee has partnered with ALS One to do journal reviews. So when something comes out, so this was one example. This is just one example from last December, where the panel really consisted of folks from the NICE committee, but also ALS One, ALS research ambassadors, and also the CDC, ALS TDI, and the Peace Committee. So it's a lot of members and panels trying to kind of tease out an article, looking at the panel sometimes includes the authors, and really try to understand what this article that has created a lot of buzz is actually about. But that's the communication part of science is really important in our community. The other committee that has kind of spawned out of the kind of growth of our research community is the Global Research and Outreach Leadership Working Group. And this is really, it came out of really sites in Europe, in Asia, that were reaching out to NEALS asking for help. And typically, I'll use myself as an example. I'm Indian, and some investigators in India reached out to me and said, they're interested in ALS and they want to develop a clinical trial site, have pharmaceutical companies engage. And so this happened because we're a multicultural country. We have many folks that have ties to other countries. And so we kind of got ourselves together and thought that we could help mentor sites that are not developed yet to help them mentor them for clinical care, but also mentor them for clinical research and provide strategy for them to develop a consortium within their country and then partner with their regional consortium. And so that's really worked out great. But what that's also done is kind of draw the attention of the other consortiums globally. And so recently in December at the International Alliance meeting that was accompanied at the International ALS meeting in Montreal, we had our first ever global summit of consortiums. So it was such a pleasure to kind of talk to the Latin American Consortium, the African Consortium, PACTALS, which is the Asian Pacific Consortium, and NCALS and TRICALS, all together to talk about what our consortiums do, number one, but second, understand where challenges may lie and whether we can help each other. And then what came out of that particular summit was that there are some things that you just can't align across the globe because there are regional legal differences and there's regional regulatory authority differences. But there are some things that are just essential. So first is the International Bill of Rights for people living with ALS. It's the basic tenets. Everyone has a right to access to care. Everyone has a right to access for genetic counseling and genetic testing, and multidisciplinary care. Those were simple things. And then things like what we want to achieve or prioritize for clinical trials. So the regulatory authorities may want different things in different regions, but we as a community, if we can come up as researchers and scientists, common things that are important to achieve in a clinical trial, when we put out a global consensus statement, it will influence the regulatory authority and then regional authorities in their review process. So it's a big task and it's an ongoing project with many researchers involved all over. We had this meeting in December. We had another virtual meeting in April, and then there's going to be another meeting in September in Melbourne that's being hosted by PACTALS. But it is like a real amazing momentum built globally. And then areas like Latin America and Africa really struggling to standardize care and get genetic testing and get it accessible. And so we're working on that as a global community, and things like trying to get a consortium and even an advocacy group within the area helps to kind of solidify a network within a country. And it's been a pleasure to work with Target ALS even, who've been doing a global biomarker study, but they've developed a consortium in India after these researchers have reached out to us. So this has been just a growing effort globally, and I'm hoping that we just continue this going forward. But it is a big task. All of us are all in different time zones. We're trying to communicate with each other, travel far for meetings, and I know all of these hurdles are easily manageable. So it just takes committed people, and all of the leaders of all these consortiums are very much committed to making things happen. While we do all this, I did mention a little bit about the Clinical Research Learning Institute. One of the biggest kind of evolutions in NEALS is we started out as a group of scientists and clinical trialists, but over the last few years, and I came on as chair in 2020, really trying to change the structure so that we become more patient-centric. And so that includes trying to make sure if we're doing SAB meetings, we make sure they connect with our research ambassadors and try to have a board where people living with ALS or caregivers kind of look at the protocol and really give them advice on what they can do to make it feasible for people to participate. You heard a little bit about the ALS Clinical Research Institute, and then you also heard about the executive advisor for a person living with ALS or caregiver to be represented in our NEALS leadership. And of course, we have the NEALS Patient Advisory or the NEALS PAC committee. This committee is really important because the executive committee needs the PAC to be proactive. And if there's some issues in the field that NEALS needs to kind of intervene or be proactive about, they become very critical in what our initiatives are that we prioritize. So as an example, one of the things that our advisor had told us is that we need to engage more with government agencies and organizations. And so one of the things that we've done over the past year is to do exactly that. So that kind of integration of the lived experience for NEALS has really changed and evolved us The Clinical Research Institute, I'm just putting this here because it is one of our biggest programs, ALS Research, Clinical Research Institute. After you do the formal curriculum, either virtually or in person at our annual meeting, you become a ALS Research Ambassador. It's really about understanding the challenges and opportunities in ALS research. There's mentorship, there is education, and there's communication and advocacy that's involved. And so we do have a nomination process, and it just the nominations for this coming Curly it just opened up, I think, June 3rd. And so if anyone's interested in being an ALS research ambassador, we would love Pathfinders to be research ambassadors too. And so the other group or committee that research ambassadors serve on is our Peace Committee. And this is really to connect research ambassadors to different stakeholders. And so a lot of the time it's pharmaceutical companies coming to kind of talk about their protocol and see how they can improve it, make it more feasible. Sometimes there's educational webinars that come out of it. Sometimes there's advocacy agendas that come out of it that pertain specifically to research. And then, of course, they do interface with the executive committee, the leadership committee of NEALS, and also the NEALS members. Now, last, when I talk about advocacy, one of our biggest successes for advocacy was this ACT for ALS. ACT stands for Accelerating Access to Critical Therapies for ALS, and it was signed into law December 16, 2021. In January, we had to enact on it fast. And so ACT for ALS, sometimes people say, oh, ACT for ALS is like the law that gives us money for expanded access. But I always put this slide up just to remind everybody that ACT for ALS is a large amount of money that was appropriated for ALS and other rare neurodegenerative diseases. And it has been transformational for our field. So it's not only about the grants for the expanded access, but it's also the public-private partnerships. And I think a lot of people don't understand what that is. I'll explain it in a little bit. But those public-private partnerships with government agencies and agencies that work on providing action plans and priorities help the government and Medicare try to prioritize what policies that could help us improve clinical care, improve clinical trials, provide better coverage for our drugs. And so this is really important because ALS really hasn't been on the radar for the public-private partnerships. And then the other part of it was it funded FDA to create, sit and think about how they can expedite and support drug development for ALS and neurodegenerative diseases. And that plan came out in 2023. And then this basic science program, this FDA Rare Neurodegenerative Disease Grant Program, was also to make sure that we continue to study the basic science so that we have better targets. If we have better targets, we have more chance of success in clinical trials to develop a more impactful therapy for ALS. So as I mentioned, FDA unveiled, it's publicly available, you can Google it, has the 5-year strategy for improving and extending the lives of people living with ALS and other rare neurodegenerative diseases. This action plan is, the link is down at the bottom if you cut and paste it, but this is actually developed by the FDA and it's from the FDA. The other example of public-private partnership is NIH did a strategic planning working group, and they had covered different aspects. They had people living with ALS, they had researchers, they had different stakeholders involved in all of the areas, and they were able to create a priority plan and a priority document that focused on accelerating research, translating fundamental research into potential therapies, gaps in care, gaps in opportunities for partnerships. And so what this document does is it provides kind of a map of where the gaps are, where NIH can provide a funding opportunity to fill in the gaps that were prioritized in this working group. In parallel, there was a second group that was organized by the National Academies of Science. And this was a group of many stakeholders, and it was led by Dr. Alan Leshner. And this document also kind of highlighted where gaps are, where major gaps are in the field for ALS and for clinical care and clinical research. Now, this document is published, and it is a document that helps guide our community, but also government agencies to think about policies, think about medication coverage, think about funding priorities, and talks to every other agency that's involved in clinical care, policy, and funding for research. Now, expanded access. So the first 3 NEALS affiliated trials I showed you, one was the CLEAN EAP. That's fully enrolled at the moment, and it's ongoing. The second one was prodopidine. That's also fully enrolled and going. RAPA, so CLEAN is gold nanoparticles, and it's moving into a phase 3 clinical trial. Prodopidine is a sigma-1 receptor agonist, and that's also moving to phase 3. RAPA already has a clinical trial going, and it has an expanded access. This is a autologous T-cell therapy, and it is still looking for participants. There's 10 centers across the country. It's a very difficult, challenging study to do because cells.
You can stay trapped in it. She's really good at
Oh, I can hear you. And then the last, most recent expanded access. Sorry. The most recent expanded access program is Ibutolast, and that's coordinated by Mayo Jacksonville. And this is the most recent, newest expanded access program through the NIH. It's 15 ALS centers that were most of them already participating in the phase 3 study called COMBAT. But the target enrollment is 200 participants. And in order to register for this trial, you have to go to widetrial.com. And so if you go there, you'll see this landing page, and you'll have to click for patients and then fill out your interest form if you're interested. So those are the 2 that are currently open, and there's a funding cycle open now. Through the Act for ALS, some of the surplus money was used to develop a natural history study. It's one of the largest natural history studies ever formed in ALS. And so that has been presented here at the expert talk series. So that's all ALS. And it's really been an amazing effort by the field and in partnership with NIH to accelerate research outcomes, create integration and combining data from existing data repositories, and then trying to create a sustainable centralized repository and connect with the community, even those that may not be at ALS centers, and also provide accessibility. So that provides remote enrollment. And so this is just a snapshot. So if you go to all-als.org, you can see real-time enrollment numbers, but it also has a participation enrollment form where you can fill out and be contacted by one of the coordinators. And one of the things about it is I think a lot of people who come into clinic come and talk to me and say, hey, I saw this, but, I'm not sure how to go about it. Should I participate? And I think sometimes people are confused because it might not be, it's an observational study, and it's meant to provide information about the condition for each individual. And the more we learn about it in terms of collecting clinical information and samples, the better we can kind of figure out what the basic biology is that might be causing ALS. And again, if we have that knowledge, we could definitely cure ALS. The opportunity here is not only for people with ALS, it is also for people at risk. So if you have a first-degree relative that has ALS, but you're healthy and you don't have any symptoms, you have an opportunity to participate. If you are someone who doesn't have ALS and doesn't have a first-degree relative and you're considered healthy, you also have an opportunity to participate as a control. So it's very important that we get the word out and try to make sure that we get good enrollment, because we have an ambitious enrollment target of 2,000 individuals with ALS by 2026. Now, this is not just about collecting samples and looking at clinical questionnaires, but we're actually trying to do some innovation within the study. So there is an ability to create a speech bank. We are trying to explore feasibility of complete remote enrollment and remote consent. We are building upon a biorepository called BioSend, and this is something that will be sent. It's a centrally located repository that's open access for any researcher to get. We're also working out like digital patient-reported outcomes, those PROs, and we're trying to make sure that there's synergy with other existing natural history studies. So we've done this in small scale, and it's taken over 20 years. Every time there's a natural history study, it's got like a couple of hundred people, maybe as big as 1,000 at some points, and they kind of sit in different areas. This is the first time we're trying to coordinate everybody into one big kind of unified, coordinated effort. And so if you scan this QR code, you'll get to this landing page, and then you'll be able to figure out if you want to participate in ASSESS, which is the all ALS portion for people who have ALS, or Prevent ALS, which is for those individuals that are at risk. Now, I went through this painstaking effort to tell you about Act for ALS, the funding, the expanded access, and all of the components that sit in Act for ALS. And it's been operationalized since January 2022, and I just wanted to kind of give you a place of where we're at. So federal funding, NIH funding is the orange, and it constitutes almost half of the 300 million we get from government. So we're really fortunate and we're lucky that the federal government has been helpful in trying to transform the field. And it's been, Act for ALS has been something that has catalyzed our field to really do the things that we all wanted to do for a really long time, but we didn't have funding for. And Act for ALS has helped bolster that amount of money. And so that's what we continue to want to have going forward, to kind of keep the sustainability of this effort that's just been an amazing transformation in our field. So in the expanded access programs, I always get the question, oh, well, expanded access, like, should we be using the government dollars for something else? And I think it's really important to just touch on really briefly that the NIH funded expanded access programs are really like research programs. They're not truly expanded access. Expanded access, just to level set us, typically expanded access is different from a clinical trial. And expanded access is reserved for somebody with any serious life-threatening condition that has exhausted all their treatment options, and they're just trying to access an investigational therapy that's oversighted by the FDA just for treatment. But in this case, expanded access is not only for the access to the investigational drug, but we're actually trying to learn and contribute to the field. So there are research aspects to it. So some of the innovation that's been brought in through these funded EAP programs is really these flexible designs and really this heavy vetting of like remote visits or trying to do something completely decentralized and doing remote collections. Digital outcome measures have been included in most of these programs, and definitely there's longitudinal clinical and biomarker sample collections. The neat thing about this is that all of the expanded access programs that have been funded all have to collect samples and put it in the same biorepository as all ALS. So they all carry the same global unique identifier, and they all go into this BioSend repository. And what it will do is create a neutral biorepository that's accessible for all researchers, and it's open access. So I think it's really important to understand that it's been creating an infrastructure for us in ALS. Other innovation includes creating virtual or synthetic controls and our applications of propensity matched or historical controls, and see if they're validated. They're able to be validated for efficacy. But these things are very rigorous. So they do have full data monitoring for data validity and reliability. We have these outcomes and measures of function and survival. And we do employ steering committees, data safety monitoring boards, there's clinical monitoring. So the data that's collected is very rigorous and standardized. And just to break it down further, the Clean EAP is one of the first attempts at really doing a fully remote enrollment. So half the people that are enrolled are virtual and completely decentralized. And it's the first time I've ever had somebody participate in Alaska. So we have to fly a team out there. They have to take a ferry to get to the person and do the assessments. And so we got to some remote locations in the US for the first time. And the person who participated was so grateful because they don't even have an ALS center. Predominantly really pioneered getting a lot of small centers to be up to snuff to try to provide at least expanded access, if not learn how to do clinical trials. And RAPA, a lot of people that come to my clinic ask about T-cell therapy and stem cell therapy, and they ask why it's not more broadly offered. It's really hard operationally at the centers because it has to be a partnership between neurology and sometimes hematology oncology. There's a lot of operational details of either a bone marrow biopsy or trying to get samples that will be the basis of creating those cells. And so it's a complicated process, and RAPA's EAP has really increased the number of centers with that expertise. But essentially that infrastructure that's being created by these EAPs is not only the shared biorepository, it's also creating this portal that could be easily accessible, trying to standardize global unique identifiers and really standardizing our natural histories collection and bolstering it. So I think that's under, I think it's not really under, I think it's underappreciated in our community about what it's contributing to our scientific infrastructure. With all that said, and I'm putting this slide here, I'm at Columbia and I'm going to put it here at risk. But in the moment, late February, early March, obviously all of you know what's going on at Columbia and other institutions, but there was some impact by the government on freezing federal funding and doing evaluations to see what could potentially be saved or continued. And so I put the title here as Science is at Stake. It was, I felt it personally. So the Expanded Access Program that I'm the PI for is the Clean EAP grant. I definitely got a lot of questions, a lot of reviews, a lot of audits. But I was fortunate enough and grateful that we were able to continue and so have all of our expanded access programs to date, and all of our federally funded programs have been able to continue. But that hasn't been the case for many others outside of ALS. And so that can delay or prevent discoveries. It can interrupt current and ongoing research. It can reduce, and this is one of the points, that bullet point, reducing the number of young investigators, is going to handicap us in the United States and slow down our discoveries. And it can impact care and treatments that we could potentially develop going forward for these serious life-threatening conditions. So some of the grants that have been affected include like center-based grants. So, a Clinical Translational Science Award, CTSA, funds like the Clinical Research Center. So if I want to do a clinical trial at Columbia, the Clinical Research Unit is funded by the CTSA. But if you cancel that grant, then they don't have funding. Large UO1 grants, these are large projects. So our expanded access programs are part of this UO1 mechanism. And then a lot of training grants. And so this was felt across the country. And I know many of my colleagues have felt it. I've been more vocal about it to try to see what we can do to change things for us. And so I had a platform. I'm the co-chair for NEALS, and based on input from our executive committee advisor, our Lane Olaf, and also from our PAC committee, we were able to kind of create what's called the ALS Organization Forum. And so we started February 28th, and essentially what we decided to do is try to get organizations in the United States all together to talk about research and where we align and how we can advocate together to make sure funding, including federal funding, is protected. And if there is a risk, how can we as a community mitigate that risk and ensure that everything that we want to do and that we have ambition for can continue? And so we wanted to, NEALS, we tried to invite as many people as possible, and everyone said yes, to work together to optimize the opportunity to collaborate and develop an environment that's conducive for research and drug development without pause. And so we wanted to work together to kind of advocate for those initiatives. And so essentially we wanted to create this forum to kind of generate discussion and really actually learn about each other in a more in-depth way so that we can figure out where our strengths lie, where we can collaborate more to kind of protect our community, and where we can advocate and better communicate across our organization. So reducing duplication, increasing collaboration, and trying to make sure that we have a mitigation strategy in case we have potential cuts. And so these are some of this was the first cohort that we had in February. We had a subsequent cohort, and Everything ALS was there to try to kind of continue, because we couldn't fit everybody in one meeting, but we're going to have one more meeting in August, and hopefully at the annual meeting all convene. But it has been successful in trying to make sure that our funding and advocacy has the right tone, the right message, and a unified voice. And so some of the things that NEALS prioritized is really making sure we're advancing ALS clinical research and accelerating the development of ALS treatments. We want to make sure our education and training programs stay intact and make sure if there's ways to cross-fund these things or joint fund these things, we want to make sure that stays. And of course, collaboration to improve clinical care and clinical research and tools to help provide people with better care and better access to research. And so some of the opportunities that came up during the discussion are some of the blue highlighted bars, which include centralized information and resource sharing, ALS clinical search tools, research funding coordination. So if like a grant goes to one organization and it doesn't get funded, we have another organization that's willing to either rescue it or have interest in it. we wanted to make sure there's technological integration and research tracking. Of course, always clinical and genetic testing advocacy, government funding for ALS research, and then also for clinics developing AAN, American Academy of Neurology standard of care, and maybe enhancing our biorepository and registry efforts. And so there's more to come here. This has been all these meetings that we've done has been on a volunteer basis. We have personally gone out to kind of talk to everybody to get their thoughts, try to make things operational, and try to make sure that our funding remains. And so we anticipate kind of reporting this out at our annual meeting. So this annual meeting will be October 7th through 10th. Everyone's welcome to come. So just make sure everyone kind of has this vibe that there's no hurricanes this year. We got weather made us have a virtual meeting last year. This year, they are all ready for us. They have a second building in Clearwater, so hopefully that'll come. We have the CRLI nominations that have gone out, and so if you're able to go, that would be great. I promise I won't be pointing at you like that picture, like that. But it is a way we'll have an annual in-person Clinical Research Learning Institute, but we also hope to continue collaborations. The meeting format, I flushed it. Me and Dr. Barry have really tried to change it up a little bit. So there'll be tracks for science this year and tracks for clinical care, because we've had feedback from the clinical researchers and clinicians. But we also wanted to make sure there's a roundtable for research ambassadors and a roundtable for industry. And we also want to include like a forum where we can, if there's innovations that are coming out of each of these organizations, we want to be able to share it and be a platform for information sharing and sharing innovation, because that's the only way we're going to be able to move forward, is just real transparency, collaboration, and communication. So with that, I'll stop sharing because I'm out of time. Yeah. And I want to make sure I give time for questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Jinsy. This was excellent. There was a lot that you covered, and we've got some lot of good questions here. So let me kick it off. I know this is not about NEALS, but because you talked about trial, there was a question on ALS My Match program. Not sure how much you're familiar, but someone wanted to know if they're already in a clinical trial, is there an opportunity to still be in the ALS My Match program?
Yeah, I think so the first phase of the My Match program is looking at biomarkers. So if you're already on an investigational therapy, you could probably get screened for the biomarkers. However, if there's an investigational or experimental therapy that's available, you would not be able to take the experimental drug plus whatever's in My Match. You'd have to kind of complete one and go to the other. And I think it's also a very early program. I believe there was a webinar that was done. They've done several webinars. Healy has done one on the Healy webinar platform, and then NEALS just did one yesterday.
Yes. Okay, I'm joined by my colleague Sylvia, so she will also work with me on Q&A.
Yeah,
Sylvia.
Awesome. The next question is, will the network cover Africa and just generally globally? What are the plans to support ALS globally by NEALS?
Who asked that question? That's a hard question. Each region has their own consortium. Some are newer consortiums, some are more established consortium, like NCALS and TriCALS are more established. Canadian sites are part of NEALS, but Canada has their own consortium called Canadian ALS CALS. ALS Africa, or the ALS Africa Network, is still being developed, and they are trying to be more mindful of the countries that they're including. South Africa is the most developed country, and Janine Heckman is the physician that's actually leading that consortium. There's a long way to go because there's a lot of variability from country to country in Africa in terms of accessibility to care and accessibility to genetic testing. NEALS' role in those territories is not to like go in there and be like, put the NEALS flag down and be like, hey, we're NEALS. Our goal is to take our experience. So for example, I had somebody come in who doesn't have there's no ALS center, but she's interested in ALS. She wants to develop it. So she asked, she's a physician. She asked, in my country, we don't have anything and we don't have an advocacy organization. What are the steps that I need to take if I want to create a network and I want to bring pharmaceutical companies into my country? So she asked me actually at the American Academy of Neurology. So, I told her, I said, well, first you need a center that has people living with ALS that come and get treated. So once you have that, and if you have more than one physician or a colleague in another place that wants to do it in your country, then trying to meet with them and do it. And that's a labor of love. You actually have to find time outside of what you do to do it. But once you have 1 or 2 or 3 centers, the next thing is to see if you can try to develop an advocacy organization, a group of people living with ALS that say, we want experimental therapy in our country. And that voice is very powerful, even if it's just one voice. But if it's vocal, it works. So once that happens, and that's where I lean on the International Alliance to help reach into those countries. So sometimes they are already aware of people doing that. And once they have the advocacy organization, the third is to understand the regulatory process for drug approvals. If they understand that, then they can communicate with pharmaceutical companies about what is required in their region for clinical trials and a potential approval. And then they need to market their centers and how they can standardize the care, and their advocacy organization needs to kind of connect with those companies to bring something into that region. And it's doable. And certainly I've seen Turkey do it within a year, even with that massive earthquake that happened. So there are countries that Greece is working on it. India has done it well. And so there's many countries. And so once that happens and we talk to them as NEALS, the next thing is we want to really make sure they connect with their local consortium. So if there's an Indian network, I connected them with PACTELS. If there was a Turkish consortium, we made sure they are connected with NCALS and TRICALS. So we've been trying to be very meticulous about collaboration in that way.
Thank you. So this one, I didn't make it up, Jinsy, so you can see that this is what we've been trying to talk about with NEALS. If someone wants to register in the trials, you mentioned that NEALS affiliated.
Yeah.
How would a person sign up to enroll? Where would we find more information about the trials, and how do we sign up? We're interested in keeping up to date with new and ongoing trials.
Yeah, that's like the $1 million question. I think so right now it's not as coordinated as it could be. I think it's improving as we have people ask the question. So obviously everyone is aware of clinicaltrials.gov. That is not somewhere you register yourself. You just search for the information and dig through it. And that's never been ideal. So NEALS actually developed a clinical trials database and a navigator. And so we had a person dedicated to a phone line, and we had a search database. Again, you have to do the work. And then ALS TDI developed something very similar. And when we saw that they developed it, we thought about, hey, maybe we don't each have to have our own. We will work together. So that's one of the things that have come out of this kind of ALS organization forum. But, people were like, we can still do better. And of course, Indu can always, it always pushes the boundary and wants to do better. So we did learn that there are, our technology is there that we can actually automate these things, because a lot of the searches are manual. And, when I see somebody, I'm doing I see their data, and then I'm manually typing in their data and finding studies for them, and then I'm telling them. And it's a very manual process. So one of the things that came out of our consortium and working with Everything ALS is trying to figure out an automated process to keep, so maybe, and I'm proposing this, say there's technology that can scour all of the information to try to develop, so AI to kind of look at all preclinical programs and clinical programs. And one of the hardest things is sometimes we can do that, but then it gets outdated within 4 weeks. So if we can get that technology, that's step one. Step two is trying to find a house for it, whether that's Everything ALS, NEALS, wherever that may live, and then make sure it's shareable. The next level beyond that is then if we actually succeed in doing that, then I could envision where this type of AI technology could then be used. Like if you come in and see me and you're like, Dr. Andrews, thank you for talking to me. What clinical trials are there? And I put all your information in an electronic health record. And that there's a system that's incorporated into my electronic health record where once I'm done with your physical exam and I type your note, it actually tells me what trials you're matched based on what AI has seen in your note. And better yet, it would be great if that technology would then contact or send information to you based on your, releasing your information and giving permission to be contacted. So it's kind of like a pseudo match. It's like one level beyond a database, clinical trial matchmaker. So that's how I hope. I don't know much about technology, but I have a creative imagination. So that's kind of what I hope.
Yeah, thank you, Jinsy, for mentioning that. And we are actually working on what we call Sava AI. Sava is one of the person with ALS. He's in Netherlands, and he's been putting all these trials together. And Lyle Ostro, whom you guys all have met, one of our scientific advisors, he's been blindly using it and using that trial database to register, to talk to other people. And he said, hey, there's somebody called Saul. Do you know about this person? He stopped updating. And we looked up in our database. Obviously, he's been attending our expert talk series, thanks to people like Andrews, who's been and then we contacted him. Obviously, he said it's a lot of work. And so we have taken a lot of his, what he's done and working with Amazon in the back end, because it's even taking clinicaltrials.gov and also the Europe database. So it's going to be one big database. It's going to be automatically updated, and our data science team is working on LLM. So it will be something like you can ask questions saying, what are the trials in Georgia with my FVC? Or we'll even match your FVC and your diagnosis date, because we have a lot of your information if you're in our research. So that is going to get released sometime in August, September. So we're working very closely and, around the clock to get that released as fast as we can, at least the phase
It's a
one.
very hard task. And I've been doing it manually for years. And it is, trying to stay on top of it. It's not just like the trial databases. You have to search like the press releases, the company posts and the pipelines, and it's very hard to do. So if we do achieve it, it's a major success in our field.
And also we're putting mechanism of action. So maybe the two trials, it's the same trial. So, it's the same mechanism of action. So you don't have to, think about those two trials. And also we want to match with the time, right? You might want to get into one trial, which might be 3 months. And then, after 2 months, you might get into second trial. So we optimize your time as well.
Yeah, that timing, so that's one of the wild cards here. So say, one of the things that I've seen as a clinical trialist over 20 years, initially when I came in the field at 2005, it's like one major late phase clinical trial, and then that would stop, and then there would be another one. So there was really no choices and no options for people living with ALS. But then when, as time has gone on, sometimes I get somebody early in the process and they're eligible for more than one thing. Or they're eligible. Sometimes now we have 2 EAP programs. They can choose between one or the other. And like, can you help me figure out which one to pick? Or should I wait for the next study? So then the conversation becomes more complicated. So it's not just about knowing what's happening now, but knowing the time frame for what's coming in the future. So in business, you guys who are in business, you guys have forecasts. And I really think that the other complementary aspect of this is having a clinical trial forecaster. So what's coming in the pipeline, what's the projected timelines, and it doesn't have to come from the company so that they don't get tied to it, but maybe a neutral party.
Yeah. And we have about 20 clinical pharma companies who's partnered with us now. So we hope to get pretty much everybody who's actually planning for a trial or in the trial to be working with us. So that's our goal. So thank you. So that's what we'll work with Jinsy and NEALS with.
Yeah. I love presenting here. You guys ask the hardest questions.
Good.
Awesome. Our next one is, you briefly talked about, how federal funding has impacted, but I just wanted to go over it a little bit more. Participant asked, has the ALS research and clinical trials been impacted by recent cuts to ALS research fundings? And also, how is NEALS advocating for ALS patients to the federal government, if you guys are in any way?
Yeah, that's a really great question. You don't disappoint on the hard questions. So first of all, in ALS, we have not had major impact for the federal cuts, but that's because every organization has been very vocal. And I will say that based on the first meeting, so the problem was the issues were happening internally at the institutions, and Columbia was hit first. And we were really given instructions to really, kind of wait it out. We can't be, don't jump the gun, don't make a scene. We have to kind of figure things out. There are legal issues involved. So the advocacy organizations didn't have information to kind of go advocate right away. So then we created this ALS organizational forum to kind of let them know what the temperature is, what grants are at risk, what grants are being inquired. Definitely we did meet with people in the government to explain what we're doing, how we're using the funds, and what it's for. So that, these are all, again, extra time out of whatever I have to do, primarily for my responsibilities at my institution. So then I had to lean on advocacy organizations to speak for us. And so that was really important. So NEALS, just so everyone is aware, and I'm saying it publicly, NEALS is actually an organization that has member institutions. And so member institutions means that individuals are not members of NEALS, but the institutions can be state or federal, or sometimes they're not for profit, but have advocacy and lobby policies that you can't violate or cross. So often NEALS cannot go directly and do advocacy. I can go as Dr. Andrews, but even that has got me in the hot seat. Even I did the congressional testimony in 2021, and that took so many approvals, and still I was scared I was going to lose my job for whatever law and policies that people had. So it's tough to kind of do that when you're an employee of an institution. But that's why it's really important to collaborate. So this is where pathfinders, ALS research ambassadors need to work closely with advocacy organizations. You can go on the Hill, you can talk. The one thing that's going to be really important, so I said the grants are okay for now, but that does not guarantee that they're okay tomorrow. Okay, and it's very important that we express gratitude and how much federal funding has positively impacted our field, because it's been transformational. And using what we know as what the impact was, so the slides that I shared about the impact, using that as the basis for why federal government should continue to fund ALS and neurodegenerative diseases, because it'll be a burden for the health economy in America going forward. There'll be a 70% increase globally for ALS. And these ALS is something that affects Americans, and it's indiscriminate. So those are kind of the ways that you can advocate. And you can write also for your congressional person within your area. So whoever's your representative, writing them and letting them know that you're grateful for the federal funding. I hope you are also helping to continue to make sure that we get continued funding. One thing that's really critical. So I told you that Act for ALS was signed into law in December 16, 2021. It is now up for reauthorization for 2026. So by December, Congress has to agree and reauthorize it. If they don't reauthorize it, everything that I said about federal funding that has helped us won't happen and will be cut. So it's really critical that Act for ALS gets reauthorized. And that we continue to protect the funding. And it was not there's always, if you look close enough, there's always things that are not perfect about how it's been executed. We had to move really fast, and we can always improve upon what we've done already in terms of expanded access, basic science grants, and our public-private partnerships. But securing that funding and moving it forward is really critical. And really, this is why I took this webinar today. I want to make sure it's there for everyone to hear and to know what to do.
Awesome. Thank you. I have another question for you. What percentage of pharmaceutical companies who offer EAPs ask patients to pay for the EAP drug? More so, what financial support, if any, are you seeing from pharmaceutical companies provide participants for expenses of the trial?
So in my 20-year career, I have not had a large EAP program. I'm talking like 100, 200 patients ever make the burden of paying for the actual investigational product. It hasn't happened. It's happened in one or two cases sporadically throughout. And the reason is that in the United States, we're governed by the FDA. And if you have an investigational product and you want to provide it through expanded access, there is a mechanism for drug companies to recoup the cost, only the direct cost for the actual drug. So if the drug costs so much to manufacture, you can recoup that cost because you're trying to offer it in goodwill to somebody who can't participate in a clinical trial. But historically, the community, so I'm saying people living with ALS, the caregivers, and also the researchers have not been positive about charging or putting that burden, because it creates a lot of other problems: inequity of access, burden, financial burden for people living with ALS who already have other burdens. So we've kind of steered away from that by working with companies to try to make sure that there's alternative ways to fund the EAP. But this is, people were critical about the NIH-funded EAPs. They're not big enough, they're too rigorous. But really, a lot of small companies don't have the bandwidth and don't have the resources to give EAP if they must do a clinical trial to get their product approved. So this government funding has been critical to kind of expand, even though it could always be more people that get access, but to have it at this scale already was really made possible by the funding. We don't have big companies in our space. They get into the game once the product has been de-risked, like has completed phase 1, phase 2. And they want assurances. So it's tough to get expanded access programs launched. Typically, they have been small, like 10, 20 people involved in a single center, and most of them have been funded either by foundations or mostly by philanthropy, donated dollars. So someone comes in, they get access, they're grateful, they want to help other people, so they give money and they help other people get access to the drug. And most of the time, 100% almost of the time, aside from the NIH funded ones, anytime I've done an EAP, it's donated time, donated space, donated work that you do on the side.
Wow. So the next question is in working with NEALS, is there a master scientific roadmap of pathways, hypothesis compiled to determine the scientific priorities of the studies or an integrated design to streamline efficient learning?
So I think NEALS has worked really hard also with the Healy Center to try to figure out like a general clinical trial design priority. But the National Academies of Science document actually highlights some of the areas of interest that they prioritized as targets, like TDP-43. It's buried in a long document, but it's there. But I personally think, and this is the second time this has come up, where I think that there is a scientific advisory board. We work very closely with even Packard, which is a basic science community, and other communities that are mainly scientific, to try to figure out, like each year, maybe annually, trying to figure out if we can come up with a kind of priority targets to look for in ALS. I think that's on our to-do list. It came out of our collaborative organizational forum as well.
Thank you.
Our next question is, I'm going to go back to the clinical trials. What do you see currently that's been promising in the many clinical trials that NEALS is affiliated with?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've noticed is that so before, a lot of these companies that are NEALS affiliated came to the scientific advisory board. So there's an increased push to try to make sure that there's more experiments that are more appropriate or more predictive in human clinical trials. So in that way, when we're NEALS affiliated, we feel like there's a little bit of confidence in them. The second is that one of the things that's been kind of interesting to watch, it's not necessarily, I can't weight one program more than the other as promising, but one of the interesting evolutions is that we have a lot of gene targeted therapies in clinical trials, and they're targeting the small groups of people, right? And so a lot of people who have sporadic ALS feel left out. But we've had a slew of companies looking at genetics that modify the disease progression, and they are taking already established technology like antisense oligonucleotides to modify that gene expression. So UNC13A, ataxin-2 was one attempt, but there's definitely Stathmin-2. So Zalud, Amylyx, Calpain is targeting Calpain, Leal Therapeutics. There's several that are developing gene therapy, Trace Neuroscience. These are all gene therapies really meant for sporadic ALS, to do gene modification and alter the progression of the disease. So I think that's a really exciting area, because the technology we know is effective, but the target is what we're going to really see if it works. The real kind of home runs are going to be like in the SOD1 space. If we're going to use viral vectors, tofersen is great. It's an intrathecal, like you have to do a spinal tap every month actually. But that becomes tiresome for people. And so if we can develop a therapy that can just be delivered once in a lifetime, and the virus just gets into all the cells and stays there and replicates, that would be great. even if it's a hard route of administration. So I know several companies that are working on that.
Mhm.
And then we just need to understand the science a little better, and that's where all ALS comes in. If we can understand the science a little better, then small molecules, pills, injections, intravenous therapies, targeting nerve inflammation, oxidative stress could work a little bit better.
Thank you. And talking about understanding better, the All ALS study, is it for all people, mean globally? Are they able to participate? Especially, there's some people who are from Canada as well.
Yeah, that's a good question. So currently, because it's an NIH funded study, it is really for the 50 states in the United States, but it is meant to be synergized with global repositories. I will point out that there are efforts globally in Canada, in Europe, and also in Asia, for kind of developing a global biomarker study. So that Target ALS is actually working on that. And then there are in region efforts that people are working on as well in terms of natural history, because if they can show where people are, how many people have ALS in their area, they can also convince research to come into that area, pharmaceutical companies to come into that area to help treat those individuals.
All right. One of our last questions regarding a participant who currently has ALS and whose mother sadly passed away 40 years ago from which started off as bulbar palsy. No one in the family has been affected except for this participant. However, their genetic test was negative. So their questions are, one, is there any other way of knowing if it's familial or sporadic? And then two, what would be needed from the participant in the future in case it happens again?
So if the person's mother had ALS and they were tested negative, at that moment in time, so panels change. That's the one thing I have to say. Over my career, the panel for ALS originally in 2005 only carried one gene. And now there's many, many genes on these panels. So it is kind of important. If you do have a first degree relative that is affected with ALS, even though they're genetically negative, there is still a small risk that's higher than somebody who has nobody that's a first degree relative that has ALS. And so as each year goes on, there's always exponential number of new genes that are discovered, and then these panels change. Sometimes even variants of unknown significance. So like you might have some variant and they say, oh, it's not linked to ALS, but maybe reclassified. So it's important to stay in touch with the ALS community, number one. You can, as a person who has someone who is a first degree relative affected with ALS, participate in the All ALS program. And I think that can help. But information that's collected under research is not typically reported back to you. If you do have symptoms, and I will say that there are some clinics that are now developing, this is the next frontier. So Dr. Terry Hyman Patterson has a clinic for asymptomatic individuals at risk for developing ALS. And there's subtly some clinics that are developing it because there's need for monitor and surveillance and sometimes even emotional health care for those individuals. But if you're monitored like that, you will be caught earlier if you do develop ALS. And if you do, then it's really important to get to, if you have muscles twitching, if you have muscle weakness, you really do need to get evaluated by a neurologist right away and get a referral to an ALS center at this time. Our practice may change. Yeah, go ahead.
I think maybe to clarify, this person has been diagnosed with ALS as
oh, thank you.
Limb onset. Started with the left limb, even though the mom had bulbar palsy.
Oh, yeah. So if you do have, so that was my scenario if you don't have ALS. If you do have ALS, but your mom did not carry any genes that were identified, I would still consider getting genetic tested if you haven't, to get it tested because the panels are different. The time lapse, there's difference in panels. And also try to see if you can participate in natural history studies as well.
Yeah. And this person did get the genetic test and it was negative, at least the gene that we know.
Yeah. So the genes that we know now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Jinsy. This was excellent. And we are just so honored to have you and share your evening with us. And thank you very much.
I got one question here from Chris. I'm just going to sneak it in there.
Yeah.
Chris, we actually developed a Think ALS tool to try to get people more aware in primary care emergency. And I think Tim Lowry is also some part of this, but I've actually worked with many emergency med folks, primary care, general neurology to kind of raise awareness. So there's a tool to kind of refine diagnosis. There are still going to be misdiagnoses. So sometimes people might have twitching and get sent over to an ALS center, but they actually have just fasciculations and not ALS. So there'll be, it's going to be important to make sure that we develop a biomarker or a diagnostic marker for ALS, and that's in the works.
Thank you.
All right, guys. Thank you. I'm sorry for keeping you late.
Oh, no, thank you for being with us and spending your evening with us after all day of clinic. So thank you.
We really appreciate it, Dr. Andrews.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. Keep it up. Just keep up that energy. Make sure you let
Yeah.
people know we need the federal funding.
Thank you.
We'll speak it out loud.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
All right, folks, look at that. Another in your living room full of information because you came today. It's so important that you show up because we want to show up for you. And that's every day. Now, I've got a special little something for you. We have a new program called After Hours, Office Hours, and it's tomorrow at 4 p.m. And the best part about that is if you have questions about our app, we have answers. If you have questions about your nutrition, we will have somebody who will be there to answer your deepest questions. So here it is, our poster. It is tomorrow, June 12th at 4 p.m. Pacific time. And we really want you to use our app as much as possible. And so we're bringing this to you. So if you have any questions, we want you to have answers. So thank you for your interest and thank you for being here today. We're an extended family and we have a little bit of time left. So I want to ask does anyone have any thing that they would like to offer to the rest of the group?
I would like to share that, when I was going through as a caregiver for ALS with my husband, nutrition was something that was very, very hard to understand what its intake has been and what should we do and how do we reduce the neuroinflammation. So the app is really, what we're trying to do is get a dietitian to help you guys. And also the app is very easy to understand what micronutrients, what macronutrients, what are the different inflammatory markers. So that's what we're developing right now for ALS. So this is something that for you. So if you can share with us, what you're finding, what you're not finding, how we can help. That will be great. So we're really here to understand what else we can do to help you.
It's called teamwork, folks. And without us and you working together, we won't go far. But with all of us putting in all the effort that we can, ALS, watch out because we're coming after you. And it